And we're going to sort of go through it, not really quarter by quarter, but the first half and how the Pacers got out to that sort of 20-point lead, even, given how bad the Pacers have been this season. And then we'll talk about what Joe Mazzulla was able to do and bring this game all the way back. And then in that fourth quarter, the Stars were put back in, and Jaylen Brown took over from there. He had, once again, a incredible shot in the corner, almost a mirror image of that one in the 2024 Eastern Conference Finals, where he shot that over, I think it was Pascal Siakam. And in this one, he has almost a mirror image on the opposite corner, 4 seconds left, and inbound from Derek White, and he hits just a clutch three to take the lead. But that being said, we have to start all the way back at the beginning. And this game started with the Pacers coming in, shooting around just 32% from three. That's probably one of the biggest, flaws of this team and why they're, having such a rough season, even without Tyrese Haliburton and getting rid of some other guys via trade and free agents. But a lot of it comes down to the fact that, you're shooting just 32% and they shoot 60% in the first half. Like, just an unbelievable shooting performance from the Pacers in the second half. It wasn't helped by the Celtics as they mightily struggled defending and transition and giving up a couple offensive rebounds, which they tend to do. That's right now. All they haven't been beaten that often. A lot of their, the ways they've lost games is from self-inflicted mistakes, whether that be rebounding, whether that be a couple other things. They haven't been just, thoroughly outmatched. And obviously this was the case in this game, right? Pascal Siakam, he was pretty dominant early. Boston struggled, I think, a little bit with his physicality and his size, given that they went, they start small a lot of the times, and they have, Keita, who's been out there, and we're actually going to talk about in just a second the rotations and how Joe Mazzulla is going back to more of a center lineup. But Keita, he was out there, but the Pacers did play with, two bigs, and what's his name, Huff or whatever. And so Keita was often guarding him, and Joe Mazzulla was putting smaller guys were getting switched on to Pascal Siakam, and he was pretty dominant in the paint. Second chance points, right? Getting rebounds, stuff like that I've talked about that have hurt this team on countless occasions throughout games. And the Celtics, they trailed by 18 at half. It got to a 20-point lead early in the third quarter. But we know the state of the Pacers right now. And it just felt like this game was salvageable coming out of the half, right? 18-point leads in this game are nothing anymore. And it actually felt like Joe Mazzulla sort of pulled the plug. He took the Stars out and he was like, yeah, we're not going to fight in this game. You guys are giving me no effort. We're just going to put in the bench unit and ride that the rest of the way, and, we'll just chalk this up as a loss. And that's just not what happened. Joe Mazzulla puts in the bench unit, and they just go absolutely berserk. Not shooting-wise, but hustle plays, physical defense, getting out in transition, making timely threes, of course. But for the most part, it was just energy. Stuff that only Ugo Gonzalez, Jordan Walsh, Baylor Shireman play with. I've talked about this before. Ugo Gonzalez has no off switch. He's 19 years old, and he can just, turn it on and go for an entire game without stopping to catch his breath. It's ridiculous what he's doing right now. But, I think it really start with, the play where the Celtics sort of forced a rebound or forced a missed shot, and they weren't able to get the rebound. And it allowed the Pacers to get this one play where Joe Mazzulla's like, yep, I'm calling it, timeout, pulls the starters, and with about 9:20 or so left in the third quarter, Mazzulla sends that clear message, I think. A message that, if you're not going to play hard, if you're not going to put in the work and, pay attention to the little details in defensive rebounding, boxing out, forcing turnovers, stuff like that, you have to get everyone to be bought in or nobody gets bought in, right? It's like one of those things where everyone has to be doing it or it doesn't work. If one person's not doing it, it won't work because someone will be open for a opportunity to grab a rebound. But I think Joe Mazzulla, this is a good, moment to talk about Joe Mazzulla and just his coaching strategy before we talk in about how they actually caught up in this game. I think we've been really hard on Joe Mazzulla over the last couple of years, right? He's had a fantastic, championship or bust roster for the last 3 or so years, if you want to count 2023 or not. And there's been moments where, he hasn't, he's made some mistakes as a young coach. He's made some, decisions that have cost the Celtics games in that way. And we saw that in 2023, I think, for sure. He was unwilling to call timeouts at a point. I think we're well beyond that by now. But it just seems like Joe Mazzulla is pulling all the right buttons this year. I mean, to be able to just take a team that on paper has nobody except Jaylen Brown, maybe Derek White, Peyton Pritchard, not enough to contend for a championship, let alone in the Eastern Conference. And he has this team at the third seed, the sole ownership of that third seed, with 2 games up on the Sixers for that second or for that fourth seed, and they're not far off from the Knicks and Pistons now. I think those teams are significantly better teams. I know the Pistons still have the 1 seed. I actually think the Knicks are a better team, and we can talk about that later. But, I mean, to be, 7 games above 500? It's just incredible. But, he does that, going back to the game here, he does that full, hockey sub out of that timeout, something that he rarely does, but he felt, in this moment, he had to teach everyone a lesson. And, I mean, the bench has earned that trust throughout the season now. The bench hasn't ever played all together like that, but individual guys have earned the trust. Joe Mazzulla bringing back Luka Garza, who I think we all thought, including me, he was, well off to the end of the bench. Down there by Chris Boucher, who we haven't seen a minute of in the last 2 months, really. But, with Luka Garza, the defense still isn't great, but he does something that is surely needed on this team, which is the offensive rebounds. Stuff that he's, I thought he was way, way out of the picture. And I think Joe Mazzulla is realizing you need another center out there, not to play together, but you can't be going small lineups for the majority of the game. You have to be playing with a 7-footer at some point, throughout the game. Right? And Katie can't play full games. He's only playing whatever in the 20 or 30 minutes, and you need Garza out there just be a spark plug, really. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's going out there, he's tipping balls for offensive rebounds, he's picking up fouls and ones, sort of going to the rim, stuff that, just gives, as I've said, it gives momentum to the team. Now, he's not, running up and down the court. He's not getting plays run for or anything. But when the Celtics miss a shot, he's right there to tip it back in. He's right there to tip it to Peyton Pritchard, for example, for a 3. Or to just come down with it, go back up again, and draw a foul. Right? I mean, that just stay ready mindset that Joe Mazzulla instills in all of these guys. And, after the game, players are always like, yeah, I didn't know I was going to get an extended run. Right? Joe Mazzulla never tells them that they're going to be playing tonight. They just have to be ready. And, I've talked about this before. At one point, right, that's great for the ability of players to come in and just make an impact. But at another point, right, if you don't know you never know when you're going to be playing. It's hard to prepare yourself and get in a steady rhythm, which can help players significantly as well. But it's worked so far. Anthony Simons has looked better as of late. He's more bought in on the defensive end, which is extremely beneficial. He's knocking down shots. We did a whole thing on Hugo Gonzalez the other day, which you can go check out. But Hugo Gonzalez, I don't know if he's taken Jordan Walsh's spot. Jordan Walsh has been sick over the last couple of games or so. But Hugo Gonzalez, as I've said, the energy of him is just unmatched by anybody in the league right now, it seems. And he's doing a lot of the same things Jordan Walsh is doing. He's a little bit bigger. Obviously, he can guard some bigger players. I'm not saying he's better in any way. They're really two of the same players. And we've yet to see them both out there on the court at one time. I don't know if you need that much defensive energy. But lately we've been seeing the offense coming alive for him as well, right? And I think we all forget, right? He's played professionally since he was age 9 over in Real Madrid in Spain. So it's not like he's not prepared for this kind of environment. He's doing things at 18 or 19 that, only Cooper Flagg is doing. And Cooper Flagg, we all know, is a generational talent. And Hugo Gonzalez is not that. He's the 5th guy on this team when he's on the court in terms of offensive production. It's just incredible. But I think, we've talked about the energy. We talked about the physicality that they brought. The Celtics just slowly chipped away at this lead. It went from 20, then it went down to 12, then 8, then 4. A 19-6 run from this bench unit without any of the stars on the court. The Pacers went 12 of 20 from 3 in that first half. They go 1 of 20 from 3 in the second half. Just a worst shooting by any NBA team this season in that second half, right? And, a lot of that comes from the Pacers missing shot, but most of the credit goes from the intensity and crowd-backed momentum that Hugo Gonzalez, Baylor Scheierman, Anthony Simons, Luka Garza were all bringing in that, late third quarter. I think the shooting also helped, right? Luka Garza made a couple of threes. Anthony Simons was making some threes, right? And we've talked about Anthony Simons and his play style. But when you're playing a full bench unit like that, and you're just relying on transition opportunities, I'm okay with Anthony Simons sort of going a little ISO because his job out there is to do the offense while the rest of the team does the defensive end, and it works perfectly. And given that he's, getting better at, staying locked in on the defensive end as games go on, we're seeing a much better production from that unit as shown in this game. Now, the Pacers, as we said, did go 1 of 20 from 3 in the second half. They just had a horrendous shooting performance. But, as I've said, it wasn't all the Pacers. And then, the fourth quarter comes around. The game is down to around 5, 6, 8 maybe points. I don't exactly remember the moment. But Mazzulla's like, the bench unit proved a lesson. The starters are all pissed sitting on the bench. He brings the starters back in, and it's pretty much game from there. The Celtics get the lead on a huge three-pointer, as I've said at the top of the show, from Jaylen Brown in the corner. Just a ridiculous all-time shot from Jaylen Brown. And, Jaylen Brown just takes over in the fourth, entirely. 14 points in the fourth. Another game with 31 points, over 30 points. He had, I believe, 9 rebounds as well, right? Given that he sat for, probably 8 minutes or something, 8-9 minutes of actual game time in the second half there, he still gets to that 30-point mark. I think, he outscored the Pacers in the fourth quarter 14-13 just by himself, right? We've talked about, the fact that he was pissed sitting on the bench. He said that after the game. I think this is a lesson that you take from this because, Jaylen Brown, he's not used to just being benched like that. There was a couple of, games. I think they had a game last season where they lost by like 50 or whatever, and it wasn't close after the second half, and Mazzulla waves the white flag and just benches everyone for the second half, but they never come back in that game. The fact that, they were able to come back in this game sort of proves a bigger lesson about how guys that are younger, less talented are outplaying you. And Jaylen Brown took it to heart and obviously just dominated in the fourth quarter. We talked about Hugo Gonzalez, we talked about Luka Garza and their physicality, their effort, their energy. I think this basically was one of those games where the Celtics sort of won without that ego of, Jaylen Brown, Derek White, Peyton Pritchard, who are all, I'm not going to say superstars, but all, huge, players for this team. And the fact that they were all, benched, and it showed how, just because you're the star on this team doesn't mean that you get to play if you're not putting in the effort and work. And I think this is a game that the Celtics can build on, and it's a learning moment, but it's also a win, and those are rare, right? There are very few games where you win and there's stuff to take away from it. There's always, you lost and there's those silver linings. But this is one of the few where there's, no silver linings because you win as well. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, everyone. From my family to yours, I want to wish you and your family a wonderful holiday season and a fantastic start to the new year. If you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing, liking this video, sharing with others. It allows me to continue to, produce content like this, covering the Boston Celtics, the team that you love, the NBA as a whole, one of the best sports, arguably the best sport in the world. So thank you guys very much in advance. You can check out this podcast on Apple, Amazon, Spotify as well in audio format. It would help us out a lot if you guys could leave us a rating and review. All of that is extremely welcomed. And thank you guys once again.